Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of this video on making experimental code changes. Just to remind you, we ended the last part after we had identified the correct line that we needed to use to actually update the Python prompt. And we did update it to 3 equal signs and then 3 arrows. But remember, we didn't have sufficient width in our shell sidebar to be able to actually see everything, right? So just to remind you, we identified this line 478 in update sidebar is how we know we are setting the Python prompt, but we aren't able to actually see everything. So you could have taken some time to sort of approach this on your own. And the approach that you could take is to actually just look through this shell sidebar class first to find any hints. You could, just look at this overall file and sort of reason that it seems that the sidebar.py class is applied to a lot of different applications. For example, here we have the shell sidebar. You could see an implementation of line numbers, which shows, the 1, 2, 3, 4 on the Python editor. It looks like there's a base sidebar class, which maybe applies to any type of sidebar. For our purposes, though, let's look through shell sidebar. And as you look through it, there weren't too many functions that seemed very relevant. You could look through bind events, grid, change callback, update sidebar. Didn't seem like it had anything. But something that was promising was an update font. So as you can see, we have some configurations for, finding the character width and then configuring the width to be, it looks like character width times 3 plus 4. So this is quite interesting because we have some sort of code that seems like it could contribute to the width of the sidebar, but we don't know for sure. And we want to go about, confirming whether this is the right location. So this would be an instance where we would make an experimental code change to see if what we were doing was in fact correct. So this line seems especially relevant because we're multiplying the character width by 3 and then adding 4. And then in the previous line, we find the character width by seeming to measure the width of each character for each character in either this arrow or the 3 dots. This sort of lines up with what was before either 3 arrows or 3 dots as the Python prompt. And then we multiply, the greatest width of these two characters by 3 and then add 4 to it, presumably just for some padding. So let's actually just update this to have 6, okay? Let's make the width equal the max, the character width times 6 and then add 4. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, okay? One thing to note is that when you have an unsaved change in VS Code, you'll get this little white circle up there. So let's save it. And then let's rerun this. So I'm going to end the current execution by Command C. I'll do an up arrow to rerun this command. And as you can see, we have correctly sort of widened the shell sidebar. Now we can see all 6 characters. One sort of note here is that this may not be the best implementation of, deciding what the prompt is for the Python shell. It seems like maybe this could have been an actual attribute, maybe in base sidebar, we have, or maybe in shell sidebar, we would have some variable like self dot prompt, and this is, maybe the 6 characters that we want. And then we could have, the following variables sort of be based on that. So for example, we would put self.prompt over here. And then, another sort of change we would need to make is that we would want to measure the widest character in self.prompt. And finally, we would want to, rather than multiplying by 6 and having like a hard-coded value in there, we would want to do times len of self.prompt. So I'm just showing you some of these changes so you can keep in mind what sort of effective additions to the code base could be. We don't want so many places where there are dependencies on each other. We don't want like hard-coded values. In this case, I think the original developers were totally fine in their implementation because the prompt isn't actually something that is changeable. There's no setting where users can actually change those 3 arrows. This is something that we've done by, diving into the source code and making the changes. But hopefully you can sort of see with this change, and let's go ahead and try running it. So I just saved it. I'll end the previous execution and run this new one. And as you can see, it worked the same as before. So as you go forward, you're not only going to be looking for like what is the correct code to add to make this thing work, but you also want to keep an eye out for effective design choices and sort of more effective changes that won't hurt you down the road as you go about continuously, developing the idle code base. Okay, so thanks for tuning into this video. Hope you got some clarity on how you can make some experimental code changes to confirm your hypotheses. And this is definitely a strategy you should employ going forward as you do, future assignments in this class, and also are faced with your own sort of like software engineering tasks that would benefit from you making some of these experimental code changes.